The next approach we're going to talk about is the instructional approach. This approach works beautifully in a school media center because the idea behind this approach is that a carefully designed and implemented instruction will prevent most managerial problems. If you have a good lesson that's well-paced, that the kids are enjoying, you're not going to have any problems for the most part. And the role of the teacher in this approach is to plan interesting, relevant, good lessons. Another idea behind this approach is to provide each student with an opportunity for success. If a student feels successful at something, they are not going to act out. Another idea behind this approach is that you need to hold the interest of every student. And that's where the idea of differentiation comes through. You should motivate each student. And the whole idea is you make your lessons interesting. There was one of the proponents of this approach and other approaches that we'll talk about later, a man by the name of Kounin, K-O-U-N-I-N. He says that successful teachers teach well-prepared, well-paced lessons that proceed smoothly with a minimum of confusion. So that giving good directions is really, really important here. That they waste little time moving students from one activity to another. And that the activities that the students are doing are geared to their abilities and to their interests. So one of the strategies within this approach is using effective movement management. Using effective movement management. That means that as part of the procedures that you set up, or the rules, the procedures at the beginning of the school year, that you actually teach students the way you want them to move from one area to the next area. Now you may say to me, what do you mean? Don't kids know how to walk to the OPAC? Don't they know how to walk to the computers? No! Given any opportunity, your student is going to run, bump into all of the tables and chairs and shelves that you have, or bump into somebody else, or because they love the students that they're with, pull their hair, kick them, you name it. Don't wait until it happens. When you first meet your kids, and you have to reinforce this every year, when you first meet your kids, remind them that the way we walk to the OPAC is the following. When I give you the direction, I used to use a clap. When I was ready for them, I'd give a series of directions, and I would say to them, when I clap, then you can go into the various directions. But the first time I met the 6th graders in particular, I would say, all right, let's look at the route we're going to use to get to the OPAC. Because I had various routes that various aisles that they could take. So I would say, you're going to go on this aisle. I am going to tell tables to get up to walk to the OPACs. And we practiced it once, we practiced it twice. So once you practice it, then any student you see who is not walking appropriately to another spot of the library, you stop. Remember, if you give a direction, it needs to be followed. Okay? But thinking this through ahead of time works a lot better than reacting to a bunch of kids who are hitting each other and pulling people's hair and kicking and even just, you know, hugging each other or whatever. I used to have a rule in my middle school, no touching in my library, even in love. None, none. Had to watch out for those 8th graders. So, plan out the movements when kids are going to be going to different parts of your library. That's effective movement management. All right, so establishing classroom routines is another part of this instructional approach. Classroom routines are those daily activities that your classroom is going to be engaged in. Things that happen all the time that you need to set out procedures for. What might those be in a school media center?
Bathroom.
Right, going to the bathroom. When are you going to allow students to go to the bathroom, first of all? Are you going to allow them to go during your instructional input? Are you going to, yeah, remember with your lesson, you've got various parts of your lesson. You decide where it's going to be appropriate. If you don't want those kids to go to the bathroom to get a drink or whatever during your instructional input part, that's your teacher talk, remember. It's not that long. You tell the kids, you're not going to be allowed to go during this time. All right? But you set up those parameters first. And there are going to be kids who are going to say, but so-and-so, either the library teacher who was there before you or their classroom teacher or somebody else, but they allow me, your library is your classroom. You are setting up those rules, those procedures and routines yourself. Okay, now Ronnie just whispered to me, checking out books. Yes. How do you return your books? How do you check out your books? And I hate to say it, how you use shelf markers, you know, all of those little routines. You set those up. One of the biggest routines that we have to make sure we know ahead of time to tell our kids is our fire drill procedures, as well as the lockdown procedures, you know, lock-in, lockdown procedures. All right, those are just some examples of routines that you should make eventuality for. You know, part of your routines, how do you take attendance? Your routines. What are the students doing while you're taking attendance? What are students doing while you're doing your housekeeping? Your library lessons have as much housekeeping as other lessons do. You're collecting work. You're seeing which kids are absent. There may be some leftover. Who has missing books, etc. So set up a routine for when I'm involved in housekeeping, what is everybody else doing? When I'm talking to a student who's been absent, who I'm trying to catch up for this particular period, what is the rest of the class doing? They shouldn't just be sitting there. I think there's a phrase, idle hands, the devil's workshop, something like that. Have a do now activity and make it one of your routines. Right, another part of this instructional approach is giving clear directions. Remember I referred to yesterday, getting into the mind of these little beings, whether they are 5 years old, 10 years old, 13 years old or 16 years old. For activities, the same thing goes for directions. Think like your students when you're giving a direction. Make sure your direction is clear and that it's understood. And that's what Madeline Hunter means when we talk about checking for understanding. All right. Now we have something called hurdle help. Hurdle help is assistance given by the teacher to help the student cope with a frustrating problem. Hurdle help, assistance given by the teacher to help the student cope with a frustrating problem. And here's a really important part. Just when the student needs it, to avoid exploding or giving up. For those of you who took 620 already, Carol Coulthard in her research strategy actually talks about this, but gives it another name. Does anybody remember the name? The name is intervention. It was an intervention strategy that she said there are times when students doing research really need help. It's not the same for all students. We have to be wise enough as library media specialists to know when that point arrives with a particular student. And this is what hurdle help is. When students are working and they're in the process of being frustrated, either because the source that they're using is too difficult for them to read, or because they don't understand the question they're trying to answer in terms of doing research, you've got to make sure that you're there to provide a helping hand, so to speak. Okay? And the way we do that is constantly circulating and watching what our students are doing. Talking with the student, making sure that the student is able to rephrase the notes that they may be taking word for word from the encyclopedia. Remember, if a student can't rephrase something, that means they really don't understand it. If they can't put it in their own words, that means that there's a little lack of understanding there. Okay? And you do that in a classroom period. You try and get to every single student. Even if they're working in groups, you try to see what's happening with the groups. Oops.